Here's something that genuinely stopped me in my tracks the first time I saw it. A patient of mine, a retired teacher, 64 years old, sharp as a tack, walked 5 miles every week, came in for a routine checkup. No major complaints. A little tired, maybe. Some mild swelling in her ankles she blamed on standing too long. And when her lab results came back, her kidney function had dropped to less than half of what it should be. She had no idea, none. She looked at me and said, "But I feel fine." And that right there is the most dangerous thing about what's happening to millions of Americans over the age of 60 right now. You can feel perfectly fine while your kidneys are quietly failing you, and the habits doing the damage are ones you'd never suspect. I'm Dr. William Lee, and I've spent over 2 decades working with patients in internal medicine and nephrology. I've watched kidney disease silently dismantle lives, not because people were reckless, not because they ignored obvious warning signs, but because they were doing things they genuinely believed were harmless or even healthy. And that is what I want to talk to you about today. Because if you're over 60, your kidneys are already working under different conditions than they were 20 years ago. The rules have changed inside your body, and most people haven't been told. So today I'm going to walk you through 5 things that ordinary people do every single day that are actively accelerating kidney damage after the age of 60. We're going to go through them in reverse order, starting with number 5 and building toward the one that I genuinely believe is doing the most harm and the one that almost nobody talks about. Before we go further, if you find value in conversations like this, where real medicine meets real life, I'd encourage you to subscribe to Bio Secrets. We don't chase trends here. We bring you science that actually matters for your health, especially as you get older. Now let's get into it. Number 5, you're taking pain relievers like they're completely harmless. I want you to think about how many times in the last month you've reached for ibuprofen, naproxen, or even aspirin for a headache, a sore back, achy knees, maybe some inflammation after a long day. These medications are so available, so common, so normalized that most people genuinely believe, because they're sold without a prescription, that they're safe to take regularly without consequence. But here's what's actually happening inside your body. When you take NSAIDs, that's the family of drugs that includes ibuprofen and naproxen, especially after 60. Your kidneys are fed by a network of tiny blood vessels. To do their job, filtering roughly 200 liters of blood every single day, they need consistent, controlled blood flow. They regulate that flow using chemical signals called prostaglandins. Think of prostaglandins like the traffic controllers at a busy intersection. They keep blood moving through the kidneys at exactly the right pace. NSAIDs work by blocking prostaglandins. That's why they reduce inflammation and pain throughout your body. But in the kidneys, blocking those signals is like shutting down the traffic controller. Blood flow becomes erratic. Pressure inside the kidneys filtering units, the glomeruli, becomes unstable. And when this happens repeatedly over months or years, the filters get damaged. Scar tissue forms, and you lose filtering capacity that you cannot get back. Now, here's the part that makes this especially serious for people over 60. As we age, kidney blood flow naturally decreases. Research consistently shows that by the time most people reach their 60s, their kidneys are already operating with less reserve than they had at 40. So you're starting from a position of reduced capacity and then adding something that further compromises blood flow on top of that. The real life comparison I always use with patients is this. Imagine a garden hose with some kinks in it. Water still flows, but not as freely as it used to. Now imagine someone partially pinching the end of that hose several times a week. Over time, the pressure changes damage the hose itself. The practical step here is not to never use pain relievers. It's to have an honest conversation with your doctor about frequency and alternatives. Acetaminophen Tylenol is significantly gentler on the kidneys when used at appropriate doses. Topical anti-inflammatory gels can address localized pain without the systemic kidney risk. And in many cases, physical therapy addresses the root cause that the pill was only masking. If you're using NSAIDs more than a few times a week, that conversation needs to happen soon. Number 4, you're not drinking enough water, but you think you are. I want to say something that might surprise you. The sensation of thirst becomes less reliable as we age. This is well documented in medical literature. The mechanism that triggers thirst in younger adults, driven largely by changes in blood concentration detected in the brain, becomes blunted with age. What this means practically is that by the time you feel thirsty at 65, you may already be meaningfully dehydrated. And this matters enormously for your kidneys. Here's the simple version of what kidneys do all day. They filter waste products, metabolic byproducts, excess minerals, cellular debris, and move those waste products out of your blood and into urine for removal. To do that efficiently, they need sufficient fluid volume. When the body is underhydrated, blood becomes more concentrated. The kidneys have to work harder to filter thicker blood, and the waste products moving through the tiny tubules inside the kidney become more concentrated too, which over time contributes to crystal formation kidney stones and a condition called chronic tubular injury, where the cells lining those tubules begin to break down. Here's the analogy I always come back to. Think of your kidneys as a water treatment plant. That plant is designed to process a certain volume of water to dilute and remove contaminants effectively. Now imagine reducing the water supply by 30%, but keeping the amount of waste the same. The plant is overwhelmed. The filtration becomes inefficient. Things start to back up. That's chronic mild dehydration in your kidneys. Now, what makes this so easy to miss is that many people over 60 are consuming caffeine coffee in the morning, maybe tea in the afternoon, and they count that as fluid intake. Caffeine has a mild diuretic effect. It nudges the kidneys to produce more urine. So while you're drinking a cup of coffee, your net fluid gain is less than you think. The correction here is straightforward, but it requires intention. The general guidance for older adults is to aim for somewhere between 6 and 8 cups of water daily more if you're physically active or in warm weather, and not to rely solely on thirst as your signal. Starting your morning with a full glass of water before coffee, keeping water visible and accessible throughout the day, and monitoring the color of your urine pale yellow is ideal. Dark yellow is a signal to drink more, are simple, immediately actionable steps that cost nothing and protect a great deal. Number 3, you're eating too much protein and you've been told it's good for you. This one I have to handle carefully because protein is genuinely important, especially after 60, when muscle preservation becomes a real health priority. And there's been a significant cultural push over the last decade toward high protein eating, high protein diets, protein shakes, protein enriched everything. And for a generally healthy younger adult, moderate increases in protein can have real benefits. But here's the clinical reality that most people are not told. The kidneys are responsible for processing the waste products of protein metabolism. When you digest protein, your body breaks it down into amino acids. The metabolism of amino acids generates nitrogen waste primarily in the form of urea. That urea has to be filtered out of the blood by the kidneys and excreted in urine. The more protein you eat, the more urea your kidneys have to process. And processing large amounts of urea increases what we call the glomerular filtration pressure. Essentially, it pushes the kidneys to work at a higher intensity. For a 35-year-old with healthy kidneys and full reserve capacity, this increased workload is manageable. For a 65-year-old whose kidney reserve has already declined, and especially for someone with even mild, undiagnosed early-stage kidney disease, which is far more common than most people realize, that sustained high-pressure filtration begins to accelerate the very decline they're trying to avoid. Let me put it this way. Imagine a car engine that's been running for 15 years. It still runs. But if you consistently redline that engine, push it to maximum RPM for extended periods, you're going to wear it out faster than if you drove at moderate speed. The engine that could have lasted another 15 years might give out in 8. The important nuance here is that the concern isn't normal protein intake. It's chronically excessive protein intake, particularly from animal sources in people whose kidney function may already be somewhat reduced. If you're following a high protein plan and you haven't had kidney function tested recently, now is the time. A simple blood test measuring creatinine and GFR glomerular filtration rate gives your doctor a clear picture of where you stand. And if your kidneys are healthy, your doctor can help you find a protein level that supports muscle health without creating unnecessary pressure on your filtering system. Plant-based proteins from legumes, lentils, tofu generate less metabolic waste than animal proteins gram for gram. That's a practical consideration worth having with your physician or a registered dietitian. Number 2, you're sleeping poorly and you've accepted it as just part of getting older. I understand why. Sleep changes with age. That's real. Falling asleep gets harder. Staying asleep gets harder. Waking up at 4 in the morning becomes almost normal. And so many people in their 60s simply accept that sleep is just worse now and they carry on. But what most people have never been told is that poor sleep is not just a quality of life issue. It is a direct physiological threat to kidney health. And the mechanism behind this is something I find genuinely fascinating from a scientific standpoint. Your kidneys do not operate on a flat, constant schedule. Like most organs in the body, they follow a circadian rhythm, a biological clock synchronized to your sleep wake cycle. During deep sleep, blood pressure drops. The body enters a state of physiological repair. And critically, the kidneys shift into a kind of recovery mode, reducing their filtration workload, allowing the tissues to regenerate, and regulating key hormones like aldosterone and antidiuretic hormone that control fluid and mineral balance. When sleep is chronically disrupted, whether because of insomnia, sleep apnea, frequent nighttime waking, or simply too few hours, this nocturnal restoration cycle is interrupted. Blood pressure, instead of dipping during the night as it should, remains elevated. And sustained elevated nighttime blood pressure is one of the most consistent and damaging drivers of kidney deterioration that we see clinically. There's also a hormonal dimension. Chronic sleep deprivation raises cortisol, the stress hormone, and sustained cortisol elevation promotes systemic inflammation, impairs glucose regulation, and contributes to the vascular damage inside the kidneys that silently erodes their function over years. The real life picture I want you to see is this. You go to bed, you sleep fitfully for 5 hours, you wake up feeling tired, you have an extra coffee, you push through the day, and somewhere inside your kidneys, the repair cycle that should have run overnight didn't complete. Multiply that by 365 nights, by 5 years, and you begin to understand why the research consistently shows that people with chronic sleep disorders have significantly higher rates of kidney function decline than those who sleep adequately. The practical side of this matters deeply. If you snore heavily, if your partner has noticed you stop breathing briefly in the night, if you wake up exhausted no matter how long you sleep, those are signs of obstructive sleep apnea, and that condition is treatable. CPAP therapy, positional changes, and in some cases, oral devices can restore nighttime breathing and dramatically reduce the kidney pressure that apnea creates. Beyond apnea, basic sleep hygiene, consistent sleep and wake times, limiting screen light in the evening, keeping the bedroom cool and dark, addressing anxiety or pain that interrupts sleep, these are not trivial suggestions. They are genuine kidney protective interventions backed by solid physiological reasoning. And I'll say this directly, if you're over 60 and sleeping fewer than 6 hours a night consistently, that alone is a reason to have a conversation with your doctor, not just about tiredness, about kidney health. And now, number one, the one I've been building toward, the one that is, in my clinical experience, doing the most damage to the most people, and the one that is most profoundly underestimated. Number one, you're managing your blood pressure casually, and you don't realize what it's doing to your kidneys right now. Let me frame this the way I frame it for my patients, because I think the standard medical conversation about blood pressure misses the most important part. Most people know high blood pressure is bad. They've heard it links to heart attacks and strokes. So when their doctor says their blood pressure is a little elevated, they nod. Maybe they get a prescription. Maybe they remember to take it most days. Maybe they check it occasionally at the pharmacy. And in their mind, blood pressure is a heart problem, something to watch, something to manage loosely. What is almost never communicated clearly enough is this: high blood pressure is the single most destructive force acting on the kidneys after the age of 60. And it is destroying kidney tissue in your body right now, today, silently and continuously if it isn't well controlled. Here is the anatomy you need to understand. Your kidneys are essentially made of filters, about 1 million tiny filtration units in each kidney called nephrons. Each nephron contains a microscopic cluster of blood vessels called a glomerulus. Blood enters under pressure, gets filtered, and clean blood exits while waste moves into urine. That filtration process is pressure dependent. It works beautifully within a certain pressure range. But when blood pressure is chronically elevated, even in the range that some doctors might call borderline or mildly high, those tiny glomerular vessels are under more mechanical force than they're designed to handle. Imagine water pressure that's too high running through a fine mesh filter continuously. Over time, the mesh begins to deform. It gets thicker, less porous, less effective. That is exactly what happens to the glomeruli under chronic hypertensive stress. They undergo a process called glomerulosclerosis, essentially, scarring of the filters. And unlike most cells in the body, nephrons do not regenerate. When a nephron is scarred, that filtration unit is gone permanently. And here is the part that genuinely keeps me up at night as a clinician. This process produces almost no symptoms in its early and middle stages. You don't feel your glomeruli scarring. You don't feel your kidney function declining from 100% to 80% to 60%. The kidneys are remarkably good at compensating at distributing the workload across the remaining healthy nephrons, which means that by the time someone starts feeling symptoms of kidney disease, fatigue, swelling, changes in urination, they may have already lost a significant portion of function they will never recover. And after 60, this matters even more because, as I mentioned earlier, your kidney reserve has already naturally declined. You have less buffer, less margin, the same degree of blood pressure elevation that might take 30 years to cause significant damage in a 40-year-old can cause comparable damage in a 65-year-old in far less time. Now, let me tell you the behavioral part of this, because this is where I see the real problem. People who are prescribed blood pressure medication frequently miss doses. Studies on medication adherence consistently show that roughly half of people on long-term blood pressure medication are not taking it as consistently as they should. And I understand why. When you take a blood pressure pill, you don't feel better. You don't feel worse. Nothing obvious changes. So the motivation to take it every single day without fail is easy to lose, especially when life gets busy, especially when you run out of refills and tell yourself you'll call the pharmacy next week. But here is what's happening in that gap. Every day your blood pressure is uncontrolled, that hydraulic stress is acting on those nephron filters. And every nephron you lose is gone permanently. Beyond medication, the lifestyle contributors are significant and modifiable. Sodium is one of the most powerful drivers of blood pressure, and processed food, even food that doesn't taste especially salty, contains extraordinary amounts of sodium. A single can of soup, a deli sandwich, a frozen meal. These can carry 1,000 to 1,500 milligrams of sodium in one sitting, and the recommended daily limit for people over 60 with any blood pressure concern is closer to 1,500 milligrams total for the whole day. Alcohol raises blood pressure. Chronic stress raises blood pressure. Poor sleep, which we just talked about, raises blood pressure. These are not separate problems. They are interconnected forces, all converging on the same set of fragile kidney filters. The action steps here are specific and urgent. If you haven't had your blood pressure checked recently, do it this week. Not once, because blood pressure fluctuates, but across multiple readings. Home blood pressure monitors are inexpensive and accurate. If you're on blood pressure medication, I want you to think honestly about how consistently you're taking it and to treat that medication not as optional maintenance, but as direct kidney protection. Talk to your doctor about your target, because the targets have become more specific in recent years, and what was acceptable a decade ago may not be adequate to protect your kidneys today. And begin looking at your sodium intake with new eyes, not as a diet issue, as a kidney issue. Let me bring this home because I want to leave you with the right feeling. None of what I've described today is inevitable. That's the part of this conversation that I always want to end on. The kidneys have more resilience than we sometimes give them credit for, particularly when the damaging habits are addressed before the decline becomes severe. I've watched patients in their mid-60s reverse early signs of kidney stress through consistent medication management, dietary changes, better sleep, and adequate hydration. The body responds, not always completely, not always quickly, but it responds. The most important thing is not to wait for symptoms, because by the time the kidneys are speaking loudly enough for you to hear them clearly, the conversation has already been going on for a long time. The gift you can give yourself right now today is awareness and action. If you've been putting off getting blood work done, book it this week. If you've been inconsistent with your blood pressure medication, restart today with intention. If you've been relying on pain relievers casually, have that conversation with your doctor about alternatives. If you're dehydrated and you know it, start with a glass of water right now. Small, consistent decisions made with knowledge and intention protect the organs that are quietly keeping you alive every hour of every day. I want to ask you something directly before you go. Of the five things we talked about today, the pain relievers, the hydration, the protein, the sleep, the blood pressure, which one hit closest to home for you? Leave that in the comments below. I read them, and your answer might be exactly what someone else needs to hear. These conversations are how we help each other. If someone in your life is over 60, a parent, a sibling, a close friend, please share this with them. Not to scare them, to give them the kind of clear, honest information that too many people never get until it's too late. And if you're not yet subscribed to Bio Secrets, I'd be glad to have you here. This channel exists for exactly these conversations, the ones where medicine meets real human life, where the science is honest, and where the goal is always to give you something you can actually use. Take care of those kidneys. They've been taking care of you for a long time. You owe them a little attention in return.